At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Johanna Derbolowsky, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
Hey, great. It's so great to have you on the show. I love the topic that we're going to talk about today. And I'd love for you, for the audience, share with the audience who you are, how you reached this point in your life to where you're doing what you're doing, and talk a little bit about the book and the workbook that you've written.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm really honored to be here on your show. And well, about myself, this has been a lifelong journey, as everybody's. I started out with my interest in metaphysics as long as I can remember back. And there was always a little something that didn't fit. So I would take that up with my grandmother at first, and she said, "Oh, take your issues up with God." That didn't work that well because I wasn't patient enough to hear the answers. But so I studied with healers and shaman, and then went through a rebellious phase of not wanting to be like that on a mountaintop. And I studied the psychology of children facing life-threatening illnesses. And that the age-old question, why do things happen to certain people and why not, kept me going in my search. And eventually I studied clairvoyant training, and I taught that for many years, and also prosperity. And I became a hypnotherapist and Reiki master and all sorts of things along the way, and eventually ended up at the thing that I do when I call the quantum heart field experience, where we shift out of the consciousness that created our current problems, to talk about Albert Einstein, who said, no problem can be solved by the consciousness that created it. So I worked on how can we step outside of the consciousness that creates the problems that we're having right now, whether they're in business or life or health problems, so that we can solve them and move on and get to the next problem. Because there's always more. The universe seems to have an ample supply of challenges.
Well, there are. And, it's amazing how we all kind of process that life experience and go through and then reach a certain point where we're really looking to help others. And based on our own personal experiences and, as you've done major research and all those types of things, and all of a sudden you're at a point and it never stops, not to say that you're at that point yet, but it never stops, or that I am, that it never stops, that we're really there to help people. So what I'd like for you to do is to really define for the audience, what is the quantum heart field?
Well, I named it the quantum heart field because it's based on quantum physics.
Okay.
My work is based on quantum physics, that we're all moving particles, and those particles can rearrange in any which way or form and change. So shifting is actually possible. We're not ever stuck. Transformation happens all the time. A lot of times not in the direction we want to go in, if we just wait for things to happen. But we can also consciously help transform the situations we're in, and eventually the world. We can transform the world by transforming ourselves.
Well, and the quantum field is really what? A field that's outside of our conscious mind, and what exists in that quantum field, in your opinion?
I think it's awareness. It's pure awareness. that we have access to at all times, but we get so stuck in the perceived reality that we don't know that, there's a place where we're all at peace. There's a place where our spirit is. There's a place where all the answers are. So essentially, the place we came from, come back to, and always are.
Okay.
So,
and it's powerful, isn't it?
it is very powerful. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, it kind of counteracts us feeling that we're a victim of something.
Well, and it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza, but he talks a lot about the quantum field. But what he is experiencing with his followers or clients or whatever you want to call them is that there are many that not only experience that peace and start to eliminate some of those disabling, limiting beliefs that are subconscious, but also they're able to tap into some of those healing capabilities. And now there are physicians that are actually, and they're studying this with him and showing from a medical and scientific standpoint the value and the actual changes, the positive changes that take place within the body for healing and for all of those types of things. So I think it's important for the audience to understand that we're not talking woo-woo anymore. We're talking things that are actually scientifically based. And though, we may talk a little bit out there about it, the reality is that it exists, it's scientifically based, and it has miraculous capabilities if we're able to tap into it. So I'd love for you to just kind of share, based on your experience in your book, what do you do when you get stuck in a problem or an issue?
Well, I myself, when I get stuck in a problem, I have my moments of whining. I try to keep them fairly short, and then look for solutions. But when you are in the quantum field, it's just molecules. This reality is just molecules that come together in a different way. So if not observed, that was the big thing. If you don't observe something, it actually doesn't exist in your reality. So if that is true, as in the physics, then things can also shift. So if you're sick or you're having some really big problems, then you can also rearrange those molecules in your body and the cells in your body to be on that healing path or instantaneous healing. I mean, I've seen it all, and it never, it always amazes me what actually we can do when we let go and surrender.
And do you have any stories? Do you have any stories that you can share with the audience that kind of talks about that healing process that can occur?
Yeah, I have tons of stories. The one that comes to mind is kind of funny because it has all the full spectrum of it on it. So when I first learned this, I was really aware of that healing can take place instantaneously. I mean, as a kid, I experienced that. We would go to the shepherd on the mountaintop, and people had shingles, and he would talk to the shingles, and the shingles were gone. So the possibility of that happening was instilled in me early on. So I knew that there's no limits to miracles. And for me, the story that I'm going to share is kind of a little bit embarrassing, but after I really learned that, and I thought, wow, I have the answers now. It's not a good thought to ever have in the universe. I taught a workshop to chiropractors on instantaneous healings. And the day before, actually the evening before, I broke my ankle. And I had to walk in on crutches to talk about instantaneous healings. So talking about being knocked off your soapbox, it was but it was one of the best workshops ever. And for me, in healings terms, I look at what is the universe telling me? What is my spirit telling me? well, first of all, one message was don't get, too full of yourself here. And that I got that message right away. And the second was that there were things that I had ignored for a long time that I needed to take care of in my office. And by being immobilized, I mean, I live in LA, so if you can't drive, of course, I broke my right ankle. So if you can't drive, you can't do anything. So I said, okay, I get the message. I have to take care of all my things here. And it took me about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And I went somewhere and I ended up having to drive. So I took the cast off and I drove home and I said, oh, my ankle feels totally fine. And I went back to the doctor the next day and he said, oh, it can't be. But then he x-rayed it and he said, well, I guess your ankle is healed. So I think that a lot of times things happen to us. They have a message. They're not just there. They have a message, they have a direction. And if we can find out what direction this is going to, or it's pointing us to,
Well,
then
it's interesting that you talk about that because I think so many times we have experiences in our lives, just as you mentioned, you broke your ankle, and we all have situations that come up, whether it's broken bones or whether it's an illness or whether it's whatever it happens to be. And so often we let that affect us in a negative way. And here you're talking about as you looked at that, went back to the doctor, your ankle was fine, it was healed. But you look back and recognize I'm gaining a sense that there was a sense of gratitude in your heart for those 2.5 weeks that you were healing because you were able to accomplish things that you really needed to accomplish. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about gratitude, forgiveness. What does that do, not only for the people that may have offended us or situations that have occurred, but more importantly, inwardly for ourselves? What does forgiveness and gratitude do for us?
well, that's a big section in my book, actually, as the tools to move forward in life and with transformation. Because if we don't forgive, we drag behind us a lot of baggage that is weighing us down. So unless you are training for some amazing sports event, it's not good to drag a lot of stuff behind you. It'll make it hard to get anywhere. It's frustrating. And the thing with forgiving is the other person doesn't suffer. So if we don't forgive, they don't care. They've moved on. It's none of their problems. So it only affects yourself if you can't forgive. So you're self-punishing. By not forgiving, you are self-punishing, and that's useless. And
Well, let me ask you a question about forgiveness because there's so many times you hear you need to forgive whether whatever source that comes from, but what in your mind, what is forgiveness and how do we actually achieve it? How do we actually in our heart truly forgive someone though they may have wronged us?
well, number one is by realizing that by holding on to that, they are still wronging us in some way because we are dragging it with us. There's no point to it. And the other one is if you have this life attitude that this is your life, it's your play, it's your movie, you're the writer, you're the director, you put the roles in there, and some roles are pleasant and some roles that you have characters play are unpleasant. But usually when we look back, we see that somebody that was, you may have an ex-spouse that was really mean, but you're now in a really happy relationship. You wouldn't have been there if you hadn't gone through that. You would not be at this place now. So when you look at today is the day that you have to live, and you want to hold on to all these things that happened to you at some point, then you're doomed. You'll never be happy. You're never going to be able to live a fulfilled, happy life if you are not forgiving. My favorite tool for forgiving is Ho'oponopono. I think that is a magical healing method. That's what I use with my clients and everybody. And I've seen people change their whole life in like an hour.
Share with the audience what that is.
It's a Hawaiian healing method. It really was made, it's an old one, but made famous by Dr. Lou Haleakala. And it's the original version, the old healing method is 7 steps, but he narrowed it down to 4, which is the one that I adopt. Step number 1 is take responsibility. This is your life. Everything in your life, everybody in your life is part of your story. So you wrote the roles for those people. So basically, if you were mean to me today, I wrote that script for you to be mean to me today, because I wanted to learn something, or I wanted to, feel different, or maybe learn about forgiveness, or whatever it is. So I take responsibility for that. When I take responsibility for that, I realize that I wrote you not a very nice part in my play. You are the villain, unless you really enjoy being the villain. It's not a pleasant part. So I apologize. So I take responsibility. I apologize. So I'm sorry. Thank you for doing this. And I love you, and you let it go.
It's interesting as you talk about that, and I think that that's amazing that you've seen that experience and following that process, how it really helps people to forgive. But you mentioned something, and it's something about how we create our own life. It's fascinating to me as I've visited with different people and people who have really studied this, that our life is literally our reality. And as you say, it's kind of our own life film, and we are the director, we are the writer, and we can change that film and that life just based on decisions that we make and awareness that we have, and the ability to go from experiencing a life of frustration and anger or whatever that happens to be, and recognizing, what, I can change that and I can experience a better life. And it really does come back to what you were talking about, is that personal responsibility to say, what, I'm going to take responsibility for my own life. If this person offended me in some way, whatever that is, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to forgive them, going to move forward. And I think that's so significant. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's really simple, and it gives the power back to you. You can decide how you want to feel. You are not the victim of the person that made you feel bad. Or if you go into Hinduism, then it's the attachments. If you're really attached to being right and to having been harmed and all that, then you will suffer. The attachments bring suffering. If you're not attached to anything, nothing can hurt you. That's, including the body. If you're not attached to your body, then even if somebody would really harm you, it would not cause suffering. Maybe pain, but not suffering.
And what is your experience? How do people get into that quantum field from a mindset where they really become mindful of that and be able to tap into that quantum field for creation of their new life and elimination of those past experiences that are literally affecting their happiness in their lives? What has been your experience of how people tap into that?
I think everybody wants to be feeling good and happy. So if people search for answers to that, we don't really want to suffer, for the most part, at least. And it's been my experience that if somebody comes and they think like, oh, this is all woo-woo and mind bending and I don't really believe in that. And I said, that's fine. Just play along for it and see if it's useful. So a big thing for me is it useful? Is it making your life experience better? And when they follow along in just pretending the story that this is their movie and their script, usually the reactions are profound. I mean, a lot of people will break down in tears when they realize what they have put a villain through in his life script to fit their role. Because, if somebody may not have a very pleasant life to be the person that ends up being really mean to you.
Well, and you said that you've done some hypnotherapy and some of those things. Do you find that, for instance, you've got meditation, and I know a lot of people, and particularly where I'm here in Thailand and watching the Buddhists and the meditation and how that affects their lives in such an amazing positive way. I mean, it's phenomenal to see these people who are struggling, who are so poor, and yet they have a smile on their face and they're happy. And I think a lot of that has to do with that culture. And they've tapped into that in some way. So you've got the meditation that allows you to get there. Does hypnotherapy also, is that kind of a guided meditation to be able to help people to get into that quantum area from a mindful standpoint? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't really think so. I think hypnotherapy is a great tool to get to what we have stuffed away in our subconscious. So things that still rule our decisions and behaviors because there's something that we have, moved totally out of sight. So it's another baggage that we've created. The subconscious actually is there to protect you. So you have a lot of people will become very heavy when they're suffered abuse. So that's quite common that they gain a lot of weight because that is a layer of protection from people coming too close to them. So if you then use hypnosis to get to the point inside and tell the subconscious that is actually no longer serving me and it's no longer protecting me because now I'm having health issues because I'm very overweight, then the weight loss becomes easier because you're on the same page with your subconscious. So hypnosis is really there to get on the same page with, a huge part of you.
Okay. And, in your book, you divide life into structure. You've got the physical, you've got the mental, emotional, you have the spiritual structure. Can you talk a little bit about how those are tools to really get to know yourself and become aware of what needs to shift in your life?
Well, I realized that to me, the most important thing is that you get to know yourself. You need to always question and find out who you are and what things are about. And so to explain it, I thought, I don't know why that just came to me to divide it up for explanation purposes. Of course, we can't just be physical or anything. So to really get to know what's your body, what's the physical things around you, and become aware of that. So you become aware of where your attachments are and what's holding you in place. And the physical is pretty easy to see because it's our bodies and our houses and roads and everything. But the mental, emotional ones are a little bit trickier to see because that's a lot depends on what we do, because if we have this job, then we can afford to live where we live. If the job's not good for us, then we may have to give up our home or our friends or our relatives. Family and kids don't want to move. We don't want to make them. So it's a lot more involved. But even there, it's good to know. And you can still make the decision to stay in your job, but you are not a victim of having to be in your job anymore. You decide to do that because the emotions and the social standings are important to you, at least at that point. And then the spiritual spiritual structure is my favorite because that's what causes all the wars in the world and everything. That's what we believe in. And we hold on to that stronger than anything else. And that we don't have to move to shift that. We don't have to heal the body to shift that. It just takes one thought. If you have a different thought and you don't judge the people around you, you're shifting your spiritual structure. But we want to be right, so we hold on to that. So if I believe something and I believe that is the right way to believe, then at that exact same moment, I declare that everybody that does not believe that is wrong. And we see that in pretty much every war around the world. That's all about that. Instead of saying like, well, this is what I think is right, and maybe I'm right, and maybe I'm not right, and you think that, and it's okay. But we judge and we're very rigid, and even about little things, fights with your neighbors or teachers or whatever is around. So to just become aware of how your structures limit you, how much you're not flowing when you're stuck in an actual structure, which will, at the end of this life, latest vanish. I mean, it's nothing we can take with us.
Well, that's true. It's interesting. About a month and a half ago, I was, doing some photography of some Buddhist temples and so forth. And as I was traveling, there was something that really struck me at one temple. Because, here we are, a Buddhist temple, and people are very, very cautious. They go in without their shoes. They're praying, they're supplicating, they're bringing food for the monks. They're doing all of those kind of things. And yet I saw another building in the Buddhist temple area, and I asked someone, "What's that?" And they said, "That's for the Muslims to be able to come and pray." And it was fascinating to me because, as you say, there's such a mentality that we need to be right. And particularly when you get into that spiritual aspect and religious aspect. And yet here they are allowing and actually building space for people of other faiths, other religions, to be able to worship in the way that they choose to worship. And to me, that's fascinating that, if we can reach a point in time, it doesn't take away from what our personal spiritual belief is, but if we can recognize that people have different backgrounds, they came from different directions, and they have a religious belief that works for them. That becomes their story, that becomes their reality. And if we can allow them to do that and recognize that it doesn't affect us, and actually be happy and grateful that they are experiencing whatever type of spirituality and happiness and joy that they experience through that process, to me, I think you've hit it right on the head, that becomes the key. And as you say, right now, in the wars that are going on and all of those type of things, it all has to do with this concept of I have to be right. And my way is the only way. And when we can start to move away from that and respect and realize that, I can have my belief and feel very strong about that. And yet I can also allow others to have their belief because that is important to them.
That would be wonderful. I think we're all hoping that that'll happen really soon because, the way things are now, we can destroy the world at one, push of a button, and we need to come together. And the thing is that the news, the media, they all benefit from us going at each other. So everything is set up to keep us at odds with each other. But it would be good if we could see past that and see that we can actually be together. We're together here. I mean, we are. I had an echo cardiogram. And I was talking to the guy doing the ultrasound, and he said, well, to me, everybody looks the same because he just looks at the hearts on the monitor. Whatever they come in, whatever their problem is, they all look the same. They all have a heart. We all have, we were all born. We have much more in common than we have not in common. And I think it's really urgent that we start coming together and then dealing with things like taking care of our planet and everything, because that's also what we need to survive.
Well, that's so true. And I'm curious, when you talk about the quantum heart field experience, what other stories, other than the one that you shared about yourself and your personal experience, what other stories of people that you know or that you've helped? What is a one story that comes to your mind of the significance of that quantum heart field experience?
Well, I have had people that completely change careers within, 1 20-minute session and changed their life entirely because things all of a sudden fell into place differently. And also people that were in pain and 5 minutes later were not in pain. And, I'm always amazed because I don't expect anything to happen. It's not that I'm doing anything. I'm just, I'm just there and I'm facilitating and pointing and giving a direction, but I'm not actually, administering any medication or any chiropractic adjustment or anything. But it is, I love that scene from way back when I was a kid, and I forgot what it's called in English, the show, but anyway, the Beam Me Up, Scotty, where what was Star Trek, right? Where he steps into this little tube and then he pixelizes and is gone, and then he reappears somewhere else on some different planet and some different thing. To me, that's a really powerful image, and that's kind of how I see it. I think when you go to the origin before anything is born or created, we are all just pixelized energy. We're just energy. And this energy can then come together in a different form. So when I work with people, I see it that way. I see them to just completely pixelize and come back together to whatever that is.
Well, and that's so important. You hear of all of these miracles that people experience, and as you said, you're not the healer. And I think that's such an important thing for people to understand, that they've tapped into that quantum field. They've tapped into that type of experience. And in your case, you're guiding people to tap into that quantum heart field experience. And as they do that, they start to experience that emotional, physical, spiritual healing, whatever that happens to be. And kudos to you for not, lifting yourself up in pride and saying,
well,
here's what
that one.
Yeah, here's what I'm doing, but rather recognizing that, I'm just a guide. I'm here to help people to be able to experience that. And because they do, they themselves are the ones that are healing themselves.
Yeah, so generally, even I like to take it a little bit further. I only work over the phone, and people say, "Why don't you use Zoom?" Because when you see somebody, you immediately judge them. I mean, maybe you don't, but I do. You see, like, oh, they're looking pale, or what's wrong with them, or whatever. If a client would come to me, right, I would notice by the way they walk certain things. But when I don't know them, I don't know what they look like, I don't even know, where they live, how old they are, I'm entirely relying on spirit for information. It cannot come from my mind. And so to me, even though sometimes it's like there's always that moment before, it's like, oh, well, I hope something shows up.
So, Johanna, as we close today, what is the message that you would like to share with the audience from your heart that you feel could be something that would be important for them to resonate with?
I think a really important message is to anything is possible. Just, be open to miracles and be open to experiencing things, and watch your attachments, because they will bring you pain and suffering. So if we're in the moment, then we are fine. We're always fine in the moment. And then, I encourage everybody to really dig deep into your heart. Live from your heart. Because if you live from your heart, then you can change the world. You can't heal anybody else. You can't change anybody else, but you can change yourself and lead the way to a different way of being, of operating, of seeing the world, instead of the old paradigm of I am right and you are wrong. We can actually do it together.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think this message of the quantum heart field experience is so important for people, and I really appreciate you being on the show. Folks, thanks so much for listening. I hope you've gotten something out of this. Johanna, if someone wants to reach you or get a hold of your book, your workbook, how do they do that?
Well, my book and workbook are on Amazon, and also my website is quantumheartfield.com. So quantum as in physics, heart as in your chest, and field as in baseball field.
Okay, quantumheartfield.com. All right, Joanne, thanks so much. Folks, thanks for listening. I hope you'll join us again soon.